Welcome to the Make Movement Matter podcast with me, Wendy Welton. This podcast has two different types of guests, people with inspiring movement stories, as well as those who are interested in the detail of what makes people move and what it does for them. Today's guest, Caroline Williams, is a science writer, editor and speaker who loves to do just that. In her highly successful book, Move, the New Science of Body Over Mind, she delves deep into the science between the connection of movement and the mind. I really enjoyed this broad-ranging conversation, highlighting a few of my standout areas of the book. I started our conversation by asking Caroline what first ignited her passion for the connection between movement and the mind, or in her words, what turned her into a movement brain bore.
Well, it's sort of it's a weird sort of story that sounds, when you say it, like it was a deliberate life path, but actually it wasn't. It was all just a series of things that happened that led me back where I started. So I've always been, really active. And when I first went to university, I decided to go off and do PE teaching as my degree.
Right.
Not having, I was very active, but I wasn't one of the sporty kids at school. So I did that for a year. And then sort of got distracted by the science side of things and changed course to just do straight biology. And sort of as I went through that, I got more and more interested in humans, why we are the way we are, why we act the way we are, why we feel this way. Because humans are pretty incredible creatures. We have these amazing brains, and all these amazing features that, to our best of our knowledge, not many other creatures have. But we also have these huge numbers of glitches in the system, like, depression and lack of focus and anxiety and, all these kind of things. And so I got really fascinated about what science can tell us about how to sort of get the best out of our brains, but also minimize the downsides. And so for most of my career, that was looking at brain. So that's what I was, a neuroscience specialist, and all I cared about was, what happened in the brain. And my first book was about how do I change my brain to change my life. And then it became sort of obvious to me, and it started to happen in the research, that thinking of your brain as if it's not attached to your body is kind of a really weird way to think of it, because clearly we are very much one creature with the body and brain interconnected. And I also started thinking, it's true that the best times that I feel most focused, when I feel most creative, when I feel calmest, it's always something to do with having moved my body. And so I thought, I wonder if there's any science that answers that question. Why is that? And I started looking into it. And so then I sort of went down the rabbit hole of being a movement bore. And it just became clear that there was so much research out there, and nobody was talking about it, at least when I first started looking into it, about why movement makes us feel certain ways and how certain movements might affect our mind in different ways. And I wanted to look deeper than just, exercise equals endorphins equals happiness. Well, there must be more to it than that. And there was. So yes, that's what led me here to be a total movement bore.
I think I'm with you on that one. Different angle, but yeah. There is so much talked about online about the physical benefits of movement. There's that's whether that comes from the sort of aesthetic side of things, where people are trying to move to make themselves look better, or whether it's to be stronger, to be fitter, and so on. But it's such a missing link, isn't it? And as you say, it's really starting to come to the fore. And obviously, the book you've written, which is called "Move: The New Science of Body Over Mind," which you wrote a couple of years ago, and I met you when I was sort of I think you were hanging off me.
Yeah.
I've got a photo of you hanging off me and me hanging off a bar sideways.
Yes.
During my very first MoveNat certification, where I first thought, I'm loving this natural movement thing. Might I want to coach at some point? I won't tell anyone that. I'll just do the certification as a challenge for me.
Yeah.
And you were researching your book. So it was really interesting to hear. And I remember we sat and had lunches and you told us some anecdotes about things. And then, lo and behold, a couple of years later, and now it's in multiple languages, isn't it? So
yeah, it's in, there's 11 versions of it. Wow. So if you include Yeah, if you include the hardback and paperback, and the American version, it's in 9 translations.
Which is amazing. It's done really well, which is fantastic.
I'm really pleased. And it was so fun to research, just going out and doing things like the MoveNat, which I sort of went as a total tourist, saying, what is this weird thing to do with crawling around in parks and moving naturally? And why would you need to do that? And, is that any better than going to the gym? It certainly appeals to me more than going to the gym. And so I kind of got to be a bit of an anthropologist in this kind of new world of movement as something other than let's just lift some weights mindlessly and hope that we look a certain way to take pictures of ourselves and put on Instagram.
Exactly.
So, it's exciting.
Yeah, no, it was a fantastic weekend. And obviously it changed, things working up to that, and that then changed the sort of path of my life, certainly. And I don't regret it at all.
No, you've taken it and run with it. I love it.
I have, and I've certainly personalized it to people like me, I think is the best way to put it, because there's a lot of sort of very athletic, strong men out there doing it. There's a lot of brilliant women as well, but there's not many midlifers who are knocking on 50 next year, who are...
I'm a year behind you.
All right. Not quite there. It was a brilliant thing to do, changed my life. There's a lot of content about physical benefits, but let's talk about this mind. So one of the things you talk about in the book, which really helped me to understand the point of the brain in the body, was the C-squirt example. I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that.
Yes. So this is something, I can't take credit for coming up with this analogy myself. It was a Colombian neuroscientist called Rodolfo Linas. And he was trying to make the point that we don't have brains to think. We're very clever creatures. We have a lot of cognitive skills. And it's tempting to use those skills to think, well, obviously, we're the pinnacle of evolution. Thinking was the plan all along. But no. And what Linas says is if you look back in evolutionary history, there's a point when evolution was trying to decide whether it was worth investing in a brain, because brains take a lot of energy. Okay. Our brains are like 2% of our body weight, but they take up 20% of our energy budget. So they're expensive bits of kit to run. And so you're only going to bother with that if it's worthwhile. And so he used this example of a C-squirt, which is like looks like a sort of bagpipe sort of type creature that has 2 tubes. One that sucks in water from one and blows it out the other.
I like that particularly because I'm Scottish. I can.
There you go. You can imagine that one. So when they're in their larval form, they swim. They're like little tadpoles. And the C-squirt larva will swim around and it'll be looking for a spot to attach itself to for the rest of its life. Okay. And so when it's moving around, it has a very basic brain. So it just coordinates its movements with, good versus bad. So should I go this way? Is it dangerous? Should I go this way? Is that rewarding? Linas put it beautifully. He said, well, movement's too dangerous to attempt without a plan because, you just wander around, something's going to eat you. And so these little larval C-squirts had their brain. It used them to look around the ocean, finding the perfect spot to live the rest of their life. And once they find it, they glue themselves onto the floor by their head. And one of the first things they do as they turn into the adult form, the bagpipe shape, is they reabsorb their entire nervous system. And they never think again. And so Linas said, well, clearly brains are to inform our movements in the world, because if we don't need to move anymore, then that's too expensive to kit. So the whole thing goes in the recycling, and, you can just lie there. It sounds quite idyllic some days, just sitting there, sucking in water, blowing off water. Yeah, exactly. So that's the kind of an increasing view, is that brains are there to inform our movements in the world. They're there to move. And so, through evolution, and definitely in our case as human beings, moving and thinking are very intertwined. And so if we don't do the movement, then our ability to think sort of suffers. And there's lots of evidence to sort of back up that that's actually happening with our increasingly sedentary society.
Well, that links on perfectly, because I was then going to ask you about the sedentarism that we're facing. Because obviously in the modern world, we're challenged by our newly comfortable surroundings. My house is set up much like anyone else's, although I sit on the floor to work, which a lot of people on Instagram comment on, because that's my way of adding in that nutrient of getting up and down to the ground and sitting and opening my hips and so on. But I've chosen to do that. Whereas a lot of people are desk bound in an office 8 hours a day, often have great priority of movement after that. They'll go off to the gym, perhaps, not everyone, and they'll tick the exercise box. They'll tick the box of what's the sort of minimum amount I need to do, or I've been told to do to stay healthy. But in your book, you talk about the effect on the brain with that. And I think a lot of people don't realize that the body is adapting all the time. It's changing because we're regenerating. And therefore, if we sit a lot, we get very good at sitting position. And our physiology adapts to that. We want to become really good at what we do most often, don't we? Yes. So that's because we're ultimately conserving energy and so on. But what I hadn't really thought about for people in that situation was the effect on their brain. And therefore almost the wider question about the effect on productivity, people's mental health from doing that and so on. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing I think I can say is that, I'm not saying sit all day and don't go to the gym, because clearly any exercise is good, it has loads of benefits. But what surprised me as well when I was researching the book is that there's so we've known for a long time that activity is very good for our brain health, and it helps reduce the cognitive decline that is sort of inevitable with old age. Our brains do get old and they do get less less able to do what they used to do, at least at the speeds that they used to do it. But there's a long-term study that followed people over decades, and they found that the amount of decline in their brains over this long period of time was correlated to the amount of time they spent sedentary, regardless of whether or not they did exercise. So there's something about sitting all the time that is really bad for our brains. And, it's good if you do a bit of exercise, but more important is to kind of make movement more a part of your day. So as you gave the example, a lot of people, now work at home at least some of the time.
Yeah.
Why not sit on the floor? And at least for a bit, because then it sort of does make you fidget a little bit and you have to change position, you're getting your movement in, and then you think, oh, I've forgotten my pen, and you have to jump up, and so you're doing leg pressing your entire pressing your entire body weight every time you get up. And we know that there are people around the world who live much longer on average, so the people in Okinawa, for example, and one of the things they have in their houses is they tend to have very low tables to eat, and they spend a lot of time. Even the old folk will be hopping up and down from the table all the time. And we know that they live longer. They have, less brain problems. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. But the lifestyle where movement is much more a part of their day, they go out foraging for ingredients, it all adds up to a more active life. And if we can try and aim for that rather than a run before work and a run after work, then that might be better long term.
And is there any evidence about cognitive decline or mental diseases by moving? Is there anything there that sort of helps us to think, okay, well, we're going to hopefully prevent in some way, or try to prevent? Or
yeah, well, I think there's so much research into dementia and Alzheimer's in particular. And I think we don't have a silver bullet clearly say that, do this and this won't happen. But one of the things that's well known to protect from dementia is activity. And so there was some quite scary statistics I came across while researching the book that said that 13% of Alzheimer's cases can be traced to a sedentary lifestyle. Which isn't to say that, everyone who gets Alzheimer's have done life wrong and that it's all their own fault. It's just to say that, if you're trying to live your life preventatively, then staying as active as possible. And that might not look the same for every person. Not everyone's as physically able as other people, but doing something that whatever you can do as often as you can is sort of putting something in the bank. And there is some physiology to back up some of this. So there's one of the other surprises for me was there's a hormone called osteocalcin, which is released from our bones when we put weight on them and move. And this has nothing to do with building bone. So we all know that, you have to put weight on your bones to protect bone density, especially women, especially in midlife, all that. But this has nothing to do with that. This actually goes into the blood and travels to the brain, where it sort of attaches to receptors in the part of the brain, the hippocampus, that's to do with memory. And it's the first area of the brain to go in dementia. So there's a lot of research now looking at how can we boost osteocalcin? So I spoke to two researchers working in this field, and, one of them was a bit like, well, I don't buy that anyone would do enough exercise to keep that level high enough, because you naturally lose it as you age, like everything else. But another one said, yeah, absolutely, walk as much as you can. And that was Eric Kandel, he's a Nobel Prize winner. He's in his 90s. Wow. He walks every day, so I'm going to believe him. So
I'll go with him.
there are good sort of physiological reasons why we might want to keep as active as possible. But potentially that might end up going to a medicine one day for people at risk of Alzheimer's. But
wow,
yes, lots of reasons to be active while we wait.
Yeah, no, that's really, really fascinating. One other area that I'm quite fascinated by is, from working with clients particularly, is people's ability or difficulty with feeling the benefit of movement, feeling it cognitively, feeling it emotionally, and even feeling it in their body, that there's something better from moving. And I really struggle with people like that. And my dad is actually one who is now doing exercise 3 times a week. I'm very proud of him, but he's forcing himself to do it. But I come across a lot of people who just don't have that that initial feeling of, I've gone out for a walk and I feel better.
Yeah.
Did you come across much of that when you're researching the book? And if you did, do you have any advice for how people can kind of turn that switch up at all?
Well, one of the things that I did realize was that people that are quite active totally got it straight away. Well, of course it's good for my brain. Of course it's good for my mental health. Of course it makes me feel better. Yeah, of course it changes my mood. Whereas I think you have to have been exposed to that at a young age, maybe, to get it. My son's 14 now. He has friends that, a couple of years ago, you take them out for a walk or a bike ride, and by the end of the road, they'd be saying, my legs hurt. And what they meant was, my legs are warming up and I can feel them getting activated, and I know I'll feel better afterwards. But if you've never sort of been pushed through that and realized that actually that's just the start of something that's going to make you feel better, it's kind of easy. And the way schools are set up these days is that, it's very perfectly possible to go through and come out the other end and conclude that this moving malarkey, this PE, this games is not for me. I don't do sport. That's not my bag. I wasn't sporty at school.
Like you say, the team sports thing, I was not a team sports player at all. I love to be part of a team in life, but team sports, no. And having found out that I am hypermobile, you do have spatial awareness issues, and often you just can't play in the same way. Your coordination just isn't quite the same. And you think, it's just you. You don't know at that age that you are hypermobile, and that could be causing problems. And it feels like that's what everyone does.
Yes.
And actually, if you look around at adults, how many adults who are exercisers stroke movers are members of teams? Very few, really. No. Very few. And is that setting us up well for a future life of movement?
So I'm sort of working on a project at the moment to try and get more movement into schools. We just finished a pilot at a school. I'm waiting for this week for the feedback from the teachers. But trying to get away from this idea that movement equals sport, equals competitive, equals whatever. And you have to be good at it. So I would like children to be able to go through school and find, try lots of different ways of moving and find which one worked for them. My son is not a footballer. He's not a rugby player. He loves volleyball because it's fast and his brain is fast and he's easily distracted. And it works for him, but he wouldn't have found that out if he hadn't tried it. So it's a matter of, trying to expose people to as much as possible.
And likewise with one of my sons, who again, none of them have been particularly into team sports, but one found climbing. And it brings him obviously strength. It's pretty hard work. But it also brings courage, because you are doing something that's a real challenge. And you feel great about yourself. And I think that's the key thing, isn't it? As early on in life, finding something that just makes you feel like you've achieved something. Regardless of how complex or difficult it is to anyone else. It's about how it makes you feel.
Absolutely. And that's a good example, because one of the bits of research that's the strongest, a lot of the research in my book is quite new and, groundbreaking, but one of the most established bits of research was with regard to physical strength and confidence and self-esteem. And, there's research going back to the sort of the late 80s, 90s, showing that if you take a group of people, young people, and you increase their strength by something like 12%, was it 12%? No, 40%. Hang on, let me find my note where I say that. Strength. No, they increased it by 40% over 12 weeks. That was it. They had quite a boost of it, but they did weights. They had significant increases in what their reported self-confidence was. So they were talking about things that had nothing to do with being physically strong. So it wasn't about fighting or anything like that. It was to do with difficult conversations, just being a teenager, which is hideous at the best of times. Being physically stronger gave them the confidence to deal with all kinds of stuff. So, and that sort of almost comes as a byproduct. You don't start climbing because you think, I want to be strong and confident, but you do it because it's fun. And then you suddenly realize that, hey, I'm good at this and it makes me feel good. And it sort of happens as a side effect.
And interestingly, that's certainly the case for teenagers, but it's absolutely the case for adults as well.
Yes.
And before starting coaching, I didn't realize that when I was coaching clients, I would be half coaching them movement and half coaching them confidence. Because when you lose movement and when you feel, creaky and not so good about yourself, your confidence goes down. And when I was in chronic pain for many years, which is what led me into this whole world, my confidence went through the floor, having been quite a mover before. And that was the hardest thing. And it was, as I started to regain my movement, I started to feel more confident. So it's kind of an upward cycle or it's a downward cycle.
Yeah.
But it can really prevent people from moving. The fear of injury, the fear of pain, not knowing whether that pain is something where they're being re-injured or not. And when you talk about it in those terms, it's so obvious that the brain and body are inextricably linked. Because one stops or starts the other, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, exactly. And you're sort of the bit from the brain to the body bit is constantly predicting what's likely to happen. And if your expectation of what's going to happen is I'm going to hurt myself, I'm going to fall over, I'm going to do myself mischief here, then that'll put the brakes on. So we've always got more in the tank in our bodies than we think we have, because there's always a bit for emergencies. That's why you hear these stories of little old ladies lifting cars off of puppies and whatever. I made that exact example up, but you know what I mean? That we have this reservoir of strength we don't know we have, but there's always a safety release. And to a certain extent, I mean, what you do trying to get people from not very much to being functional is the really important bit, because once, the people who have the least have the most to gain. And then it becomes this upward spiral, as you say. So, you're doing good work.
Oh, thank you. And I love it. And, messages like get down on the floor more, like I do, is to strengthen yourself. That's the physical side. The confidence side is to say, if I'm used to going down to the floor, then I'm used to, if it comes to falling, I'm not going to react in quite the same way, because this is a normal journey I take.
Yeah.
And clients reported, but if they have fallen, that they kind of felt like they fell well.
Okay. Yeah. Under control.
Well. Yeah. And it sort of slow mode, and they sort of rolled more nicely because they were more used to rolling around on the ground and getting down there. So again, that's kind of an unexpected bonus, but I can really understand it, because again, when I was in pain, I felt sort of scared of that distance because of the fact that if I fell, I would potentially have a big flare up, and then be in pain, much more severe pain for a few days. So anyway, moving back to your book, one thing I really wanted to talk about was the breathing whilst walking that you talk about, because it really made me chuckle when I read it, because you cited 3 different songs. I think there was Adele. I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, Rolling in the Deep, I think.
Not Cool in the Gang, no.
I found out actually recently when I was doing a workshop for a bunch of teachers as part of this schools project, that the perfect one is Walk This Way. So why I didn't put that in the book? I should have done that.
I can completely see it. Absolutely. So let's explain what that we're talking about, because that makes no sense to anyone who's not read it. So what's this about? Because walking is something that I've absolutely fallen in love with, having not been able to run since I got injured. I can run for a bus and I can run quite happily. I won't get into massive pain anymore, but I know that impact through my body is not a great thing. So I've chosen to alter to walking. So I walk a lot. And I know that it's just so accessible for people. So I blah on about it a lot. But I love that passage about the breathing. So can you share that?
Yeah. So the bit about, what the walking chapter kind of, I could have written loads more about that. I loved it. It's my favorite thing to do as well. But there are various ways of walking. One is a kind of slow meander, which sends your brain sideways and, makes it more creative connections. But then there's the brisk walk, which has totally different effects. And so there's this really fun research by a great guy who's great fun to interview, who has done, called Dick Green. And he has done research on what happens when we put our feet on the floor, put weight on them when we're walking. And it doesn't sound that surprising, but it was surprising to the scientists that when you put weight on your feet and move, we almost have these sort of like pressure sensors in the bottom of our feet in the shape of blood vessels, which set up turbulence in the blood, which kind of sends a boost of blood to the brain, which wasn't thought to happen because there's tight controls on how much blood gets to the brain. But, I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. More blood to the brain, more exercise. Yeah, that makes sense. But there's a really cool bit of his research where he found that when people walk at 120 steps per minute, something magical happens. Your heart rate starts to synchronize with your feet. So your heart goes at 120 beats per minute. And I've tried this on my Apple Watch.
So the same as the speed of the music.
Yes, exactly. And so 120 beats per minute, probably not by accident, is a dominant beat in a lot of pop songs. And a music teacher I met the other week said, oh yeah, that's marching pace, 120 steps per minute. So there you go. It all kind of comes together. It's sort of like it's the most comfortable pace for everyone, no matter how tall they are. Weirdly, we all seem to have pendulums that swing at 120 beats per minute, and that feels most comfortable. It gets the most reliable boost of blood around the body because the heart joins in with this synchronous sort of pace. And so there's this evidence. If you're walking along to 120 beats per minute, don't worry about the heart, that will take care of itself. And just walk along to your favorite pop song. Walk This Way is a great choice, I have to say. And with the breathing as well, walking fast and breathing slow seems to, breathing is sort of, I think it's in for 4, out for 4. So sort of you get yourself into this rhythm that sort of also will stimulate the vagus nerve. It kind of revs you up in a calming way, if you see what I mean. And that's a really good state of mind to be in for focus. So your legs might be a bit tired at the end, but your brain will be nice and like, okay, I'm here, I'm awake, and I can settle down and do some work.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's absolutely key, isn't it? And if you feel like your brain's going to sludge a bit because you've been sat there, best thing to do, jump out, have your walking stuff nearby, and off you go. Yeah, exactly.
And it doesn't have to be for long. It could just be round the block. It doesn't really matter.
Absolutely.
You'll just get things going, and then you're away. You told your body, through your body, you've told your brain that you need to wake up because you're moving around. And the whole point of being focused whilst moving around is because we have this past as hunter-gatherers. You wouldn't be wandering around sort of in your own world. You were wandering out for a purpose, to catch some food or to gather some berries or whatever, and you were looking out for danger. And so it gets your brain into the right state of mind for what you want to do. Whereas sitting and just going, sort of tells you that you're safe, you're in a cave, you're warm, just have a snooze.
Not necessarily a very nice cave when it's winter and you're all hemmed
No, but you might be wrapped in some furs or something, I know.
No, exactly. And there's something about that synchronicity you're talking about there. You talk a lot in the book about dance.
Yeah.
And I wasn't actually going to talk about dance for me. I know there's some dance for you because you've posted about that on your Instagram.
Yeah.
I've started to do Tai Chi as my new thing this year, which is so complicated because it is opposite things with different hands, different feet. Oh my goodness, the coordination it takes is unbelievable. But when we all kind of get it and we move together, it feels fantastic. And you write about that synchronicity, particularly referring to dance. And you've been doing some dance, haven't you?
Yes. Yeah. So this is one of the things. Dance was another chapter that I could have just gone rogue on and written like hundreds and thousands more words. But yeah, there's something about dance. Well, and also all forms of moving together that makes us feel more bonded to each other. And the neuroscience behind that, the suggestion anyway, is that when we are moving in time with other people, we have this sense of self where we know that we're in our own body and we can sort of sense our own body moving. And we know that that's me. But when someone else is moving in time with your movements, it sort of blurs those boundaries. So it almost feels like you're at one with the person that you're moving with. And they've done all kinds of really cool experiments where people have been moved together in time. And then they've done sort of tests to see if they'll collaborate together, playing these games where you can either completely, mess with each other, or you can cooperate and play nice.
Right.
If people have moved together in time, they're far more likely to cooperate with each other than if they haven't.
God.
Even in toddlers. So they've done these really adorable experiments where they bounce these toddlers in time. And then they sort of put the toddler down and drop something. And the toddler's far more likely to say, oh, here you go, and pass it back if they've been bounced in time than if they haven't. So there's something very hardwired in us that moving together makes us feel closer together. And that's probably because we do need to work together as a species. We're quite small and puny, and, we're not that fast, we're not that strong. And so that's one idea.
Sorry, I was just going to say that also makes me think back to the walking, because often if you're walking with someone, you fall into step, don't you, regardless of what your normal gait is?
Yeah.
And then you're more likely to have one of those slightly more positive conversations because you're getting this lovely synchronicity of movement in together, and then going back to the teenagers, best way to have tricky conversations is on a walk, because you're not eyeballing.
Exactly.
You're feeling that sort of release, you're feeling positive, and perhaps that synchronicity comes into it as well.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. Then there's all kinds of ways in which we can, walking meetings are a great way to, because as you say, it's not combative at all. There's other research about walking that shows that when you're moving forward through space, it doesn't have to be walking, it could be cycling, it could be canoeing, doesn't matter. That it does something to our window on the world that makes us feel as if the past is further behind us. So we have this sort of without thinking about it, you sort of think the past is behind your back and the future is somewhere ahead of you, behind front of your chest. And physically moving forward through space seems to sort of distort that timeline of our lives. And it feels like we're getting closer to the future and leaving the past behind. And so it makes people feel more positive. So if you give them sort of memory tasks, they remember more positive things when they're moving forwards. They've done it when they're moving backwards as well, and which is less practical, clearly. But there's something about moving forward through space.
Good for you. I didn't know this, but apparently very good for you.
for memory. That I didn't put this in the book, so I was like, well, who's going to use that? But it turns out that in studies, at least, if you get people walking backwards on a treadmill, they can remember things better because they're going backwards in time. But this just shows how our body and our mind they're so entwined that the direction that we're taking can affect the direction of our thoughts. So if you're, and in the book, I spoke to a man called Marcus Scotney, who is an ultra runner, and he very much feels that, by moving forward in that way, it kind of gives a sense that you can get somewhere, figuratively as well as physically. So that's another reason why.
No, it's fascinating.
So I have a walking bore as well.
All over the walking. And another area you talk about is stretching. So we were talking before about sensing how you feel within your body, particularly, which is interoception. And one of the things that I found through my whole journey through pain and trying to work out why on earth I had got myself there was that I'm hypermobile in several joints. So I'm overbendy. Some would see as flexible. But clearly it's not in a good way.
Yeah.
Because you have a sort of a collagen inefficiency, which means that you don't quite know when you're getting to the end of your range. So you go over that end of range, which can then be quite damaging. So my backwards facing knees that no one told me about for nice reasons, until someone later in life who did pointed it out and said, why do your knees go like that? And I said, do they? I had no idea. Wish I'd acted on that and researched it more thoroughly then, because it might have prevented a lot of years of pain. But something that you wrote about in your book was that, and that I also see in clients who have hypermobility, is that people have also always called me quite a sensitive person. In a sort of slightly negative way. In other words, oversensitive.
Yeah.
Not hopefully insensitive. And I've noticed that certainly people who are hypermobile tend to be more sensitive people. They tend to be much more sort of emotional people. And when I sort of discuss that with them, they have a bit of an aha moment saying, so maybe I'm feeling my body too much. And did that then lead to chronic pain because I was holding on to the pain somewhat, unknowingly, ? But that sort of link that you discuss also in the book, which was surprising to me, was also the link with anxiety. And I was wondering if you could speak to that a bit.
Yeah, so there's research. There's a really great research. If anyone with hypermobility, you've probably found her already, Jessica Eccles. She's on Instagram, and she's a researcher that looks at hypermobility and anxiety, and also it's linked to neurodiversity as well, so ADHD and autism, which are in and of themselves linked to anxiety. So yeah, apparently this link was noticed sort of 100 years ago, but it wasn't really acted upon, and there wasn't really any reason why people could understand this. There wasn't really a mechanism. But now there's a lot of research into interoception, which is my area of research at the moment. And one of the ideas is that if you've got, you get your sense of self, where you begin and where you end from your body. And if your joints, as you say, are going further than you are able to notice them going, maybe that does something to your sense of self, and you're not quite sure where you begin and end, which may cause anxiety. Another possibility that I've been told by the researchers is that when you stand up, so if you have stretchy collagen in your joints, you also have stretchy collagen everywhere else. And collagen is everywhere in the body, including in the blood vessels. And so we have a reflex that when we stand up, to stop blood rushing to our feet and making us faint, our blood vessels contract. Whereas if you have stretchy collagen, that isn't quite such an efficient reflex.
I know this so well.
Yeah, look at knowing. So postural tachycardia is called POTS. And so as a compensation for the fact that your blood's all heading south, the heart beats faster. And this sort of a sensation of having a faster heart rate can be interpreted in the brain as anxiety.
And dizziness. And a lot of dizziness when you stand up. Slightly, on occasion, really quite similar to feeling like you might faint.
Yes, well,
a lot of people,
some people do.
Obviously when it's more severe, then unfortunately that is a serious side effect.
Yeah. So it's sort of like almost a physiological reaction that's sort of slightly out of whack, which then makes your heart beat, which tells your brain your heart's beating. Usually when my heart's beating, that means something bad is going to happen. Oh my God, I might faint or whatever, or even it's just the sensation of your heart beating. And that might be the reason why it's linked to anxiety. But the really great thing about Jessica Eccles' research is that she's been doing interoceptive training with people, initially with a group with autism, but also with a group of neurotypical volunteers. And they have been training people to tune into their heart rate better. And because interoception is a skill that you can learn, which is why it's so interesting for mental health. And when people have learnt to tune into their heartbeat a lot better, this sort of helps with the anxiety, because people are able to think, to rationalize, okay, it's not that person over there hates me. It's just that my heart's beating faster because I just stood up, or for whatever reason, you can rationalize why your heart's feeling the way it is. And that can sometimes help. So that's really interesting research that she's working with the Ehlers-Danlos Society. Ehlers-Danlos, I can never say that.
The more severe.
EDS. Yes. And there's lots of versions of hypermobility. Yes. But we're just really, because of this sort of body brain mind connections that are being put together, we're just starting to go, okay, that's why something that seems to be in the head is happening in the body, and putting those things together. So
and actually the your knowledge of where your body in space, just in case there's anyone listening that this might resonate with, because I did it last night, is that you might see yourself as clumsy, because often you think that you're grabbing onto something, or you're this far from a doorway, etc., and you're not. Yeah. So you're more likely to bang into things. You're more likely to drop things, because you just don't have that same awareness. There's a sort of a grey space at the end of your range where you just don't quite have the control. And the key thing, it's important for me to say, if you are hypermobile and you're not in severe pain, is strength training, but to the end of your safe range, and learning where that range is. And certainly for me, strengthening in my overlax range to sort of slightly reduce it and be strong within that range was definitely a huge part of what got me out of pain. And the functional, but more practical patterns that I learned in natural movement. It certainly isn't a benefit to be over flexible in that situation. People sort of admire you for doing it, but actually your muscles end up doing the work of your ligaments. The ligaments are the brakes, effectively, to simplify it. And so actually your muscles get really tight. You would have thought that they're relaxed, but they get really tight because they're working so hard.
They're trying to stop you.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh no, I mean, that's really interesting. And I'm going to look into her work a bit more now, because that is fascinating.
Dr. Bendy Brain, she is on Instagram. Dr. Bendy Brain, yeah.
Oh,
she actually just yesterday, she actually went to Parliament to try and lobby Parliament for greater awareness of EDS and ADHD and anxiety. So she's doing not only great research, but she's really trying to bang the drum to make sure people know about this.
Oh, I need to get her on the podcast then.
You absolutely do. Yeah, definitely.
Oh, that's absolutely brilliant. And I also, it never fails to amuse me that my name is Wendy. Which rhymes with Bendy. So,
Wendy. You said it, not me.
Yeah, I did that for you. So to wrap up, it's been brilliant talking to you. Your book is really brilliant. I got it straight away, and I even passed a copy on to our MoveNat trainer Jerome, didn't I, for you? Through the post when I did my second certification.
Oh yes, that's right. Yeah.
It's such a good read. It's so informative. It's so well researched, and I love the fact that you can really express things simply, because often science is so difficult for common man, like stroke woman, like myself, person to understand. And so you put things simply, and you make it very amusing. Which
good.
Is great. So it's
well, thank you. That's what I'm trying to do. That's why I spend so much time banging my head off the desk at home. So it's nice to know that it's worth it.
And that's a hard skill, to sort of simplify something very complicated. It is very, very difficult. So yes, I commend you. So this podcast is called Make Movement Matter. A lovely alliteration in there. And one of the favorite things in the book was the fact that you ended on a movement manifesto, another couple of M's in there.
Yes.
My favorite one of those was number 3, which was choose movement. And you say making time for movement is not a luxury, it's a necessity, which I feel is absolutely so true. And particularly as we age, for brain and body, as we have discussed. I'm always really keen to offer practical tips to people listening. That's what I really try to do with my messages, give people ways to move better. So have you got any practical guidance or advice or tips that would help people feel better by moving more?
Well, I've already done the walking and moving forward, which is what was usually my go-to. But but my other go-to movement, being a person who works at home a lot, and writing involves a lot of sitting, I am a big devotee of the kitchen dance. So I will just crank up some music. Bit of Kylie does the job usually. Peter Gabriel, I've been listening to Graceland again, dancing around the kitchen. I mean, it's quite amusing. I have a teenage son who kind of opens the door and goes, "Why are you like this?" And then close the door and walk away because it makes me happy. That takes it takes the pressure out, because you don't have to be dancing well. You don't have to be artistic. You just need to move like you did when you were a kid, because it feels good. So, whether that's dancing, whether that's running, doesn't really matter. Just do whatever makes you feel good, and forget the whole what it looks like on the outside, because that doesn't actually matter. No, I love that. So true, so true. And I'm sure people will probably be cranking up the tunes tonight when they listen to this. Yeah, it's the way forward. It's the way forward. Thank you so much for being here. It was a real pleasure. Thank you very much. It's lovely to see you again after however many years. So long time. 4 years, is it really? Wow. We haven't aged a bit though, so that's good. Not at all. I always love hearing my guests' movement stories or learning from them about topics they're passionate about. I hope you've enjoyed listening, and if you have, you can help by doing 3 things. First, press the follow button to tell podcast platforms you want to listen again.
Second, please give the show a 5-star rating and leave a review about why you liked it. And third, I'd love you to share it with friends and family or on your socials, for which I'm truly thankful. Finally, if this podcast is making you want to start reclaiming your own movement, join me in the Reclaim Movement membership for classes, both live and by replay, and countless videos of mini movement breaks to add into your daily life, covering practical and fun, important natural movements. Visit reclaimmovement.co.uk/membership to get started with your 7-day free trial. See you for the next episode, and thank you so much for listening.